Have you ever had a conversation with somebody that you love that just went awry and went the wrong way and wound up like out in the deep end? And yeah, ended up saying things you kind of wish you hadn't said. Hi, I'm Angel. And I did that today. And it's certainly not the first time in my life that that's happened, unfortunately. In the last couple years, I've recognized or labeled it as complex PTSD. That's just one of many labels you could put on it. Sprinkle in a little autism, little ADHD, all the things and stuff, right? But really, the label doesn't matter. The relationship matters to me, and my own wellness, my own relationship with myself, and my relationship with, in this case, my mother. But in many of my relationships, what has happened is that dysregulation gets the best of me. And I do think that things like neurodivergence can really add to the frustration level and make it easier to spill over the threshold of overwhelm, as I call it. And especially when, pardon me, extra stresses are about, or I've been dealing with a round of shingles and a lot of pain. Thankfully, it's very mild this round. I had a much more severe case earlier in the year, and the combination of that, coming off the back of a couple of years of not great feeling and struggling with depression and anxiety and panic and a lot of the things that I think a lot of humans are dealing with right now, I've come to this, I don't want to even call it a new labeling, but this expanded understanding of my own emotional state and how that's playing into my physical and mental health and relational health and financial health, the whole thing. And like many people with complex PTSD and trauma-related anxiety, I tend to, once I'm dysregulated, I tend to catastrophize. I tend to take things personally. I tend to lash out. All of these are very unpleasant to deal with. And so it's understandable in some ways that a lot of humanity just writes a lot of people off with it. You know, there's a set of labels that you can get that will basically allow the rest of humanity to dehumanize you or discredit you. And I have a few of those labels. So parts of me feel very defensive and like I have to stand up for myself a lot. And a lot of times I do that and I feel proud of myself for doing that, because a lot of the trauma that I deal with is from not having any protection when I was younger and feeling like, yeah, realizing later that that's something that a healthy childhood includes, a sense of safety. And I want to be fair to my mother. She did a lot to give me a lot of safety, and I was relatively safe most of the time. So it's not like I was put into a lot of danger. You know, we lived in the country. I had a really fantastic childhood. I should put that asterisk on there. Yes, there were some traumatic parts, but honestly, it's been the juxtaposition of my internal framework with where society and humanity seems to have gone in the last while. And I'm hesitating there because I'm aware that part of my perception of that is entangled with my own magical thinking, as some therapists call it, or, you know, entanglement with illusions and illusions of grandeur. I think that's in one of the books. Yeah, I grew up really believing I could do anything and really believing in my super capacity to accomplish things. And indeed, I have accomplished many things, and I have a super capacity for doing things. But I also as my health started to fail me again, which I had a big autoimmune flare-up when I was in pre-puberty, and I'm having another one now when I'm going through perimenopause. So it makes sense that it's hormonally linked, and hopefully, pardon me, while I leak onto my own self, hopefully that's mostly over, you know, and that's I'm sure that's part of this grief that my body is feeling. And I guess why I'm talking to a video now that I may or may not share, but I think I probably will share, because my channel, if you're new here or if you've been around, you might notice it's really about being authentic and courageous and curious, and trying to get better, a little bit better all the time. Becoming more fit, becoming more free. And circling back to where I started in this video, the topic that I've been trying to write about all year and that I've been mulling over for a number of years now is what I am currently calling the shift. And I was calling it 2-minute tools a while back, and I am including those 2-minute tools in this book, The Shift. Soon to be bestseller book, The Shift, is what I meant to say. The shift is really about that choice that I have had to make countless times, and that we all have to make again and again and again in order to maintain coherence and not fall into that dysregulated state where we're likely to do or say or think things that don't serve us very well. And I am something of an expert at that, if I do say so myself. And yeah, so in that, becoming an expert at doing the wrong thing, I have been trying to hone in on a program for myself, essentially, that can get me to a place where I can have even a relationship with a therapist again. I've had a couple. I've tried to have a couple more, and I've tried out. It's not that I want a couple therapists. I just would like one therapist that I can work with. But what I found is that when you're as dysregulated as I have been getting, pardon me, in this like very entangled, complex way, pardon me again, you get congested, you cry a lot. That's part of it. Or you shut down and you don't cry at all. There's lots of ways to do it. For one, it's not like there's just great therapists everywhere, right? And it's not like they're free. So even though I do have access to some state healthcare, state-funded healthcare, which I am grateful for, I should mention, it's pretty crap in a lot of ways. And in particular, when it comes to mental health or therapy, behavioral health, I just actually went on one of their local hospitals' websites, it's a healthcare plan that my insurance covers, to see what they had in the way of possibility, which I do about once every year or 2 or 3. And I hadn't done it in a year or so, so I thought I would look again. And what I found was a behavioral health program that seemed promising, but then it said you have to go to the emergency room to get evaluated, which is essentially saying that unless you're really in a critical state, because I don't know if your emergency room is anything like ours here, but, well, it's full of emergencies, and people don't like you just coming in when it's not an actual emergency. And I've been in, like, I never go to the emergency room unless I should put a pinky finger asterisk. That wasn't true. I have gone to the emergency room when I didn't think it was as severe of a emergency. I'm hesitant there because no, I haven't. I've postponed going to the doctor hoping that I would get better, and then gotten worse and wound up at the emergency room. And what I've found in that experience is that the emergency room staff, understandably, really don't like people coming in and taking up time and space and energy for non-emergencies, or especially things like I'm sad and I'm depressed, when there's actual people like bleeding and having heart attacks and all sorts of things. So also, it's very stressful for most people, and I think particularly for me, because a lot of my complex PTSD is intertangled with a lot of trips to the doctor when I was younger, and a lot of attempts to get help that have failed. So Circling back to the point I'm trying to make, The Shift is a book that I'm writing in order to save myself in a way and hopefully to help others learn to save themselves. And it's not that I'm not saying that you shouldn't get help, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't help each other, and I'm not saying that it's not okay to ask for help or that, any of that. What I am saying is that when you're dysregulated, as I tend to get, and as I think is often the case when people are feeling ill in any sort of way, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, all those things are really interwoven in my understanding. And when you become aware of a disease or an illness or a sense of not rightness in your whole body, mind, spirit, the whole thing that you call you, when that is incoherent, as in, really it has to do with the brain waves and the heart waves. And I encourage you to look into Joe Dispenza's work if you're interested in learning more about like the science of that. He's doing some good stuff, trying to document stuff. But the reason we put our hands on our heart often when we're feeling or when we're vowing something is there's an electromagnetic field in the heart. You can measure it. Horses have a giant one. But anyway, that's completely unrelated to this conversation, probably. But in any case, your heartbeat and your electromagnetic field are part of a rhythm that is part of your natural being, your body's rhythm. And it interacts with the rhythms of the people around you and the rhythm of the earth, the rhythm of plants and probably even stones. And, life itself is all interacting with itself through this rhythm. I would say through tone also, which is vibration at a certain frequency that we perceive as sound, right? But really it is vibration, which again comes back to that rhythm for me. And that is available to all of us as a way to snap ourselves back into coherence and like anchor back into our own heart, into our own heart-mind coherence. So for me, you probably watched me go through a couple cycles of it just in this video, maybe milder cycles, but sometimes they get quite extreme. And it's really, you might be able to see how that's like a falling out of coherence of my natural rhythms with my heart and mind. And when I say heart, I'm really talking about that electromagnetic field that's interacting with everything. And I also brings to mind that the microbiome is playing a huge factor in this whole playing field as well. And we're only just beginning to just understand the beginnings of that whole aspect of ourselves. So even when I take, even if I think of myself as 7 trillion little beings, some percentage of them not even really being what I would call me, I am, because they're like microbes in my gut. And I might, it just depends on how you define you, right? Or me. But if you get into DNA and you define it by your matching genetics, then you can see that there are a lot of beings in our beingness that aren't actually our genetic material. At least that's our current understanding. I like to put a lot of space around these things because we are certainly still learning. But the coherence, let's just say if it's 7 trillion plus another trillion other things, and that's not accurate at all. I think the 7 trillion is close to accurate as far as cells in the body maybe, or microbes. I'm really not sure what they're measuring or how they're measuring that. So I will put a lot of space around that too. But let's just call it a fucking lot of beings. And when they work together, then I feel coherent and I'm able to move through my life in a way that is more positive and more functional. And when they are incoherent, and by they, I mean any dynamic interplaying faction of those beings that are comprising my body, then I start to get incoherence, dissonance, cognitive dissonance, heart dissonance, bodily dissonance, where like vibrations are crashing into each other. It's creating turbulence in my body, in my energy field, and in the bodies and energy fields of the beings around me, because we are all interconnected and contagious to one another. And what happened earlier when I had another blowout with my mother is that her and I are very entrained because we're mother and daughter, and we're only starting to practice trying to learn some of this stuff. So we're pretty bad at it. And looking back, I can see that we were having a conversation, which, you know, I can see a point in our conversation. We were in the car going to lunch, and in the time it took us to get about 5 blocks from the time when the conversation got tense till we got around the corner, we had a huge blowout. And then I decided that she should probably just turn around and bring me back to my car. And I came home, and she's now not speaking to me again. So this is a pattern we've been through before. This is a pattern that I think we both tend to blame on the other. I know that my brain has all kinds of stories about why that's her fault. And I have no doubt that her brain has all kinds of stories about why it's my fault. And also, though, I can extend her a lot of compassion, and I think she can extend that to me. I hope. We'll see. But in all of that, the reason I'm trying to share some conclusion about it, or just sharing the experience, for one, I just, again, as I mentioned, like to be authentic and vulnerable, as is counter to the trend. Or maybe it's with the trend. And for two, I am really wanting to offer this conclusion that I'm writing about in my book, which is this ongoing necessity to shift. So back to the title of the book being The Shift. It's the shift because it's an internal flip. It's a subtle but not subtle internal shift between, sometimes I think of it as like my small self, my ego, and my bigger self, this grand I am, whatever that is. Sometimes I think of it even beyond that as like the life self, although it's very interesting to me to think about how I think the ego is a very tricky part of us. And I have found in myself that the ego will, and by ego, I'm just talking about like that small side of myself that's, that lives in my head, that thinks a lot about myself from that sort of self-pitying, victim mindset a lot of times, or even from that, like, so the victim mindset would be things happen to me. Then there's the things happen by me, like I'm doing things to, I'm controlling things. That is also a pretty egotistical place to come from, like the small me. The bigger, like somewhere in the middle there is through me, where the universe and energy is working through me. And I like to try to aim for that a lot of the time, even though I certainly play a fair share of my time in the why me and to me and all those states. And then there's what I think of as the big self, the as me. That's the grand totality, the great mysterious grand poopah that is everything, as I like to call it. The great all. And that we're all a part of. And so when I can think from that framework, it feels transcendent, and I feel calmer and more coherent. And I do feel like I'm able to be a conduit for energy in the world, but not in a way that is like beholden to it, but more in a participatory way, like I'm part of it. And that's like the pinnacle that I aim for, I suppose we could say. And the shift is about recognizing that that's available to me all the time. And the work that I've been doing and that I invite you to join me in doing, even though it doesn't sound that fun, I know, and a lot of it isn't, but I do think it's a path toward healing and toward a better civilization and toward better lives personally and interpersonally. And that is to practice making that shift every time you realize that you've fallen into that small self. Every time you catch your brain thinking, why me, or how, you know, this is happening to me, or I must work and make things happen by me, which, you know, again, I think those are sequential a little bit, and that doing things by you is a positive step in the right direction from having things just happen to you. But I also think that the quicker we can snap ourselves into that state of mind of through me and then hopefully as me, and the more we can, so I want to decrease the length of time that it takes me to recognize when I'm dysregulated, and increase the length of time between the times that I get dysregulated. And lately I've been doing a pretty good job of recognizing, I say pretty good job, I'm sure there's a lot of room for improvement still, but I feel like I've definitely improved in my ability to recognize and like acknowledge and realize and take responsibility for when I am feeling dysregulated. However, I don't think at all that in fact, I feel like I've gone the other direction in my ability to lengthen the time between the times that I'm feeling dysregulated. And that's something I'll continue working on. And I'm glad I'm saying out loud to y'all, to you. I mean, I didn't mean to call you y'all. I'm sorry about that. I don't like that. It's a kind of an inside joke. Now I have to say, I don't mind it in the right context. That was the wrong context is what I meant. You might notice that I'm stammery sometimes and imperfect, and it's okay if you don't like it. But what I'm hoping is that you will take from that at least some permission to be imperfect yourself and recognize that, again, this is an ongoing process. Like even if you or I or anyone mastered this art of coherence, and I do think some people are much better at it than others, and I don't, you know, as I said, I have a lot of room for improvement, but I've come a long way, so yay me. And that's the thing is, I don't think there's an end to it. I don't think, and you know, maybe death is it, maybe there's another world after this. I really don't know at all. I've heard a lot of fascinating theories, and I've had lots of fascinating and mind-bending experiences. So I believe in the potential of a lot of possibilities, but I don't know. That's why I call it the great mysterious grand poopah, or the great mystery. And I think that's what makes it worth following into in a lot of ways, don't you? I think if we understood everything, then what would be the point of continuing? And I think in my concept of consciousness, or what many people call God, is consciousness discovering itself, like expanding and discovering itself through experiences. So again, that kind of thought brings me to, you know, the as me kind of state, and I like that. And so I think my homework for myself that I'm just giving myself in front of y'all is to have more signals around me. I think that our external environment is such a great way that to reflect how our internal environment, you know, there's a relationship there that is obvious when we look at other people, and that I tend to deny in myself to a large degree, part of that magical thinking I was mentioning. So my intention is this month of November 2023 to really spend focus my energy on creating an environment for myself that supports that shift and staying in that higher state, that, that bigger version of me that I want to be operating from. And maybe bigger isn't the right word, but more vast, less drawn down into the personal and bogged into, you know, incoherence and overwhelm, and more able to gain perspective on what's going on in my own body, even if I'm having anxiety or feeling frustrated or feeling angry or feeling sad. That, I want to make that little distinction before I wrap this up. That does not have to mean dysregulation. This has been a real epiphany for me, and is something that I'm pretty new at working at, because I came from a family where only positive emotions were considered valid and negative emotions were so shunned that I think that I've created a loop in my body where I will have to become dysregulated before I become like aware of and acknowledge these more negative emotions. So besides changing my environment, and that includes my home and my wardrobe and especially my desk and my office, I'm also losing my train of thought. That was funny. And I can't ask you to talk back to me and tell me where I just was. Yeah. My brain loves to play tricks on me like that. Well, I'm going to keep practicing. I'm sure that's not exactly what I was going to say, but it is close. Also going to quit rambling for now, because clearly I've lost my train of thought. And I welcome you to leave me a comment and or a question. Seems I have enough questions already. No, I think questions are one of the best ways that we find answers. So I do welcome your questions, and I thank you for being you and let me be me. This is part of an ongoing little piece of my life that I will probably be sharing on this channel. And I hope that it's helpful for somebody. I'm aware it's not like it's not super attention getting. But let me know if you can relate, and let me know if anything I said is helpful or bothersome that you want to talk about some more, or yeah, I remember now what I was going to say. I'm glad it came back to me, which is that I'm going to practice I'm going to find and practice healthier ways of expressing those negative emotions. And I actually have been doing a little of that and standing up for myself. Not perfectly. I'm still getting dysregulated a little bit, but I'm going to make an intention and find some ways to practice expressing sadness, expressing anger, expressing hurt without coming from a place of being dysregulated, and learning to recognize that a little bit earlier. You know, recognizing that if I'm talking about negative feelings, there's a good chance that that dysregulation is closer to coming around. And so it would be wise to check the environment, check for cues, put up some guardrails like they have in bowling, you know, do some things preemptively before I do that to help support myself so that I don't become dysregulated. And I can practice expressing my feelings and emotions in healthier ways. And there you have it, the shift. That was a wordy version. I'll be trying it again. I'll be talking about it more. I'm still writing about it. I was really hoping to have it to an editor by now, but that hasn't happened, but it will eventually. And yeah, once again, thanks. Stay curious, stay courageous, and stay free. Ciao for now.